By far, one of the best ways you can elevate your tooling is by adding texture. That's what we're going to be talking about today. That's coming up. Hello everyone, my name is Daniel Reach. This is Weaver Leather Supply. Today, we're going to be taking a look at this Celtic Cross pattern and 3 different ways that we can add texture to it. Now, the first thing that we need to do as we dive into this project is just knock out the prep steps. And in this case, that means casing the leather, adding the tooling window, and then tracing the design onto the leather. Now, as far as casing it goes, I keep it pretty simple with a project like this. I'm just going to take a spray bottle and spray the leather. I want enough moisture in the leather so that it takes about 1 to 2 seconds for that moisture to start soaking in. If it takes longer than 1 to 2 seconds for it to soak in, then we're getting to the point where the leather's too wet. So 1 to 2 seconds for that water to soak in, that's right about where you want to be. Once we've got it cased, we can go ahead and add our tooling window, and that's really easy to do. I'm just going to grab my wing dividers, and I'm going to set them to a 1/4 inch. Now, you can adjust that to whatever your preference is if you want something different, but I typically go with a 1/4 inch. Once I've got them adjusted, I'm going to set it up so that the outside tine of my wing dividers lines up with the outside edge of my leather. Then I'm going to pull it down all 4 sides. But there's a couple of things that we want to keep in mind as we do this. Number 1, I want to keep my eye on that outside tine, the one that's riding the edge of the leather, not the one that's actually making the mark. That's going to make it a lot easier for us to stay on track and not drift. The other thing that we want to make sure of is that as we're marking it in, we don't want to start at the top of the leather and pull all the way to the bottom. We actually want to move in about a 1/2 inch, make our mark, and then go to the next line and make our mark and work our way around all 4 sides. Once we've done that, we can go back a second pass and connect all of those lines. Once we got that done, we can go ahead and trace our pattern in. Now, I know there's a few of you out there that are going to notice that I've got my pattern taped to the front of the leather, and that's not typically something we would recommend because it leaves marks on the leather, it can leave residue, and that's all kind of a pain to deal with. The tape that I'm using is super cheap, and it's got a very low amount of tack on the back, meaning it's not very sticky, so it's almost not sticky enough to hold to the leather, which means it doesn't leave a mark. So ordinarily, don't tape to the front of your leather, but this stuff is so cheap that I can get away with it. We can finally go ahead and start cutting in the project. And if you're new to using a swivel knife, like you're just getting the feel for it, this is going to be a great project for you because it's a lot of long cuts that have gentle curves to it. Just the big thing that you want to remember with a project like this is that we get long, smooth cuts by moving our arm, not by moving our wrist. Once we got that done, we can go back and start beveling. And if you need practice beveling, this is going to be the project for you because that's the major part of this design. Now, I'm going to be using a steep bevel. That's going to give us the best edge, meaning we're going to get a really crisp edge along our design. If you don't have one, obviously you can pick one up from Weaver. We'll put a link in the description so you can go right to it. But in the meantime, if you want to give this a shot, you can use a traditional bevel. Your edges just won't be quite as sharp. So this is where I start to do things a little bit different than what you might see in other videos. And if you've watched my tutorials before, you know that typically I'm going to be beveling my projects at least twice. The first pass is going to be with a steep bevel. The second pass is going to be with a traditional bevel. And what that's going to do for us, it's going to give us that really crisp edge on our design, but it's also that second pass is going to bevel and compress that leather in the background so that we get the best of both worlds. The next step is one of those that a lot of people, especially in the beginning when you're learning, they kind of overlook. And that is that the ring and the cross both need those edges of the actual design rounded off. Now, you could get away with not doing this, but your eye is going to notice it even if you don't consciously recognize it. So I'm always going to suggest in a project like this that we go back with our modeling spoon and just gently round off those edges to give it a little bit more of a natural shape instead of that box corner that can come from swivel cuts. Once you've done the edges of the cross and the ring, go back and double bevel all of those little cuts inside the cross. Now, it's going to make sense in a little while why we want to do that, but you want to bevel both sides of that cut so that we're kind of creating a domed effect all the way around the cross. We've got it cut in and we've got it beveled. Now for our first texture, I'm gonna grab a fine point awl and I'm gonna go in and start creating lines within the cross. What I'm trying to do is create a rope texture. And if you've ever looked closely at an old rope, you know that it's made of a bunch of individual fibers. And that's what we're trying to create, that texture with the awl. So the next thing we need to do is create some variation in the depth and in the texture of the rope that we're creating. And to do that, I'm going to be grabbing my craft blade. Now, this is one of those techniques that we want to go really, really minimal with. If we go in and we start doing a lot of cuts on the rope, then what we're going to end up with is just shredded leather. And that's not what we're trying to create. What we want to create is those deeper little pockets, if you will, inside those rope fibers. So to do that, we're going to go in and almost create decorative cuts that really accentuate the flow of those little micro fibers that make up the rope. Now, one thing that's important to mention here is the razor blade technique is not one that I would use on a project that's going to have a lot of wear and tear. A wallet that's going in and out of pocket, a belt, this is not the technique for those projects. Maybe for a journal, definitely for decorative projects that you'd hang on the wall. We didn't do it before, so let's go ahead and run a steep bevel around the inside edge of that tooling window that we created. And for our last texture technique, we're going to be using this stamp right here. And what we're doing with it is essentially creating a pitted metal look, almost like rough forged iron. And what I'm going to do with it is I'm going to work the outside edge of the ring, then I'm going to go back and work the inside edge of the ring. We want to create kind of a highlighted ring that goes around the middle of it, and then the edges have that texture to it. One last pass with the modeling spoon over the outside edges just to make sure they look really good, and we're done. Well, I hope those were 3 texture techniques that you're going to be able to use in your projects in the future. That's going to do it for this video. I will see you in the next one. In the meantime, go make something amazing.